They say that every sound we make, every word we whisper, every note we play, never truly disappears. It simply fades. The energy dissipates, becoming an echo too faint for the human ear to perceive. But the information, the story told by those sound waves continues to vibrate in the fabric of the universe, waiting. Most of the time, these echoes are lost forever to the noise of the present. But sometimes, if a sound is born from a powerful enough emotion from profound love, or unbearable grief, it doesn't just fade. It stains the silence. It leaves an imprint on the world. My name is Carlos Mendoza. My investigations have led me to believe that some ghosts are not made of energy or ectoplasm. They are made of sound. They are symphonies that were never finished, stories that were never told, truths that were silenced before they could be heard. And they will haunt the silence until someone, finally, learns how to listen. The case file I am opening tonight is one of the most tragic and beautiful I have ever encountered. It's the story of a young audio restorer who bought a broken machine and found herself haunted by a melody that should not exist, a melody that was the sole surviving fragment of a genius who was erased by fire. This is not the story of a ghost that wanted to cause fear. This was the story of a ghost that simply wanted an audience for its final performance. This is the tale of the Silent Symphony. Chapter 1. The Ash of a Masterpiece. Sophia's obsession had now moved beyond the realm of audio restoration and into the territory of a full-blown paranormal investigation. Her workshop was no longer just a place of work. It was a listening post, a place of communion with the silent composer. Every night, she would sit her vigil, and every night, the ghost in the static would reward her with a new, breathtakingly beautiful piece of its soul. She had collected over 15 minutes of unique musical fragments, which she began to piece together like a complex sonic puzzle. What emerged was the clear structure of a revolutionary piano concerto, a work of such staggering emotional depth and technical complexity that it should have made its composer a household name. Yet, there was nothing. No record, no copyright, no mention in any archive. It was a masterpiece without a creator. Her first clue came not from the music, but from the machine itself. Driven by a need to find a tangible link to the past, she began researching the history of the Magnus reel-to-reel recorder. It was a high-end semi-professional machine, not something an amateur would own in the 1960s. After days of digging through obscure audiophile forums and digitized sales ledgers, she found a single, tantalizing record. The serial number on her machine matched one sold in November of 1968 from a specialty audio store in the Chiado district of Lisbon. The buyer's name was listed in the ledger with a simple, elegant signature. I. Neves. It was a thread. A fragile 50-year-old thread, but a thread nonetheless. Sophia took the name and began her second investigation, this time into the human world. She searched public records, newspaper archives, and music conservatory enrollment lists from the era, and there, in the 1966 registry of the National Conservatory of Music, she found her, Isabela Neves, a name accompanied by a small, black and white photograph of a young woman with hauntingly intense, intelligent eyes and a quiet, determined expression. The records noted her as a student of piano and composition, a prodigy of immense, but unconventional, talent. Then, in 1969, the records simply stopped. No graduation record, no forwarding address, just an empty space where a brilliant career should have been. The story of what happened to Isabela Neves was not on the front page. It was a small, tragic footnote in the city's history, a brief article buried in the back pages of the Diario de Noticias from February 1970. The headline read, "Reclusive musician dies in tragic Chiado apartment fire." The article was sparse on details. It described a fierce, late-night fire that had completely gutted the top-floor apartment of a 24-year-old musician. The cause was ruled accidental, likely a fallen candle. The victim, Isabela Neves, was described by a neighbor as a recluse, a brilliant but strange young woman who was rarely seen, but whose apartment was filled with the constant sound of a piano, played at all hours of the day and night. The final, heartbreaking line of the article reported that all of her possessions, including what was believed to be a vast collection of original musical compositions, were completely destroyed in the blaze. She had been, in the most complete and total way, erased. Sophia sat back from the microfiche reader, a cold, heavy feeling settling in her stomach. This was it. The ghost in her machine now had a name and a face. Isabela Neves, a genius who had been silenced not by obscurity, but by a sudden, violent tragedy. Every note of the impossible symphony she had been recording was a transmission from a life that had been cut short, an echo from a masterpiece that had been turned to ash. Driven by a new sense of duty, a feeling that she was now not just an investigator but a custodian of this lost legacy, Sophia went to the address listed in the newspaper. The building was still there, a beautiful old structure in the heart of Quito. The top floor had been rebuilt, of course, but as she stood on the street below, looking up at the window of what was once Isabela's apartment, a strange thing happened. The beautiful, complex melody of the symphony began to play in her head, clearer than ever before. It was a feeling of confirmation, a sad, silent acknowledgement from the spirit of Isabela. Yes, it seemed to say, this was my home. This is where my music died. That night, back in her workshop, the haunting changed. It became more personal, more interactive. As she listened to the static, she began to hum one of the main themes from the symphony, a melody she now knew by heart. As she hummed, a clear, resonant piano note, a perfect A-flat, emerged from the static, matching her own pitch in perfect harmony. She gasped and pulled her finger back. The note vanished. She tried it again, humming a different phrase. And again, from the dead air of the static, the piano emerged, playing the corresponding harmony to her own voice. It was a staggering, terrifying, and deeply moving discovery. The ghost was not just broadcasting, it was listening. It was responding. Isabela's consciousness was somehow imprinted on the magnetic particles of this tape, and it was using Sophia's own understanding of the music as a catalyst to bring more of it into the world. It was no longer a haunting, it was a duet, but with this new intimacy came a new, darker element. One night, while trying to transcribe a particularly complex and dissonant section of the music, Sophia grew frustrated. She made a mistake in her notation, writing a C-sharp where it should have been a C. The moment her pencil marked the wrong note on the page, the beautiful harmonic fragments coming from the machine twisted violently. The sound warped into a horrifying, discordant shriek of electronic noise, a sound of pure, agonizing frustration and pain. It was so loud, so violent, it felt like a physical blow. Sophia ripped the headphones from her ears, her heart racing. She had just discovered the ghost's true nature. It was not aggressive, but its grief, its desperate need for its creation to be heard perfectly, was so powerful that any deviation from the truth caused it an agony that it projected outward as a wave of pure, sonic chaos. Sophia now understood the stakes. She was not just a restorer anymore. She was a medium, and she had to get the symphony right, note for perfect note, because she was beginning to understand that to make a mistake wasn't just a technical error. It was an act of torture against the sad, brilliant, and terribly fragile ghost in her machine, driven by a new sense of duty, a feeling that she was now not just an investigator but a custodian of this lost legacy. Sophia went to the address listed in the newspaper. The building was still there, a beautiful old structure in the heart of Quito. The top floor had been rebuilt, of course, but as she stood on the street below, looking up at the window of what was once Isabela's apartment, a strange thing happened. The beautiful, complex melody of the symphony began to play in her head, clearer than ever before. It was a feeling of confirmation, a sad, silent acknowledgement from the spirit of Isabela. Yes, it seemed to say this was my home. This is where my music died. Chapter 2. The Confession on the Oxide. The weeks that followed transformed Sophia's life into a strange nocturnal ritual. Her days were spent sleeping. Her nights were dedicated to her duet with the ghost. The process was painstaking, emotionally draining, and utterly terrifying. She had to enter an almost meditative state, focusing her entire being on the music, humming a passage to coax a response from the static, then quickly transcribing the ghostly harmony that answered her. Every correct note felt like a small act of solace, a moment of connection with the lost composer. But every mistake, every moment of lost focus, was punished by that same soul-shredding shriek of dissonant, electronic agony. It was a sound, Sophia told me, that felt like a memory of fire. She was essentially performing a kind of musical therapy on a dead woman's soul, and the strain was immense. But through this grueling process, the symphony was taking shape. It was more than a masterpiece. It was a psychological portrait. She could hear Isabela's solitude in the lonely, searching melodies of the first movement. She could hear her soaring, explosive genius in the complex, fiery passages of the second, and in the third, unfinished movement, she could hear a new emotion creeping in, a deep, profound sense of anxiety and fear. But the transcription wasn't enough. Sophia, the audio archaeologist, knew that there was more information hidden on that tape. The music was the primary signal, but what if there was something else? Something buried even deeper in the noise, beneath the ghost's melody. She decided to subject the tape to a forensic-level analysis, a process far beyond simple audio restoration. She began using a technique called magnetic tape microscopy, a way to digitally scan the physical arrangement of the iron oxide particles on the tape itself, looking for patterns that the playback head might have missed. It was a long shot, a search for a whisper inside a hurricane of static. For days, the scans revealed nothing but random noise. But then, she found it. A ghost within the ghost, buried deep beneath the layer of musical information. Running parallel to it, like a secret, parallel track, was another signal. It was incredibly faint, a tiny, rhythmic anomaly in the magnetic field. It wasn't music. After applying dozens of filters and amplifying the signal 1,000 times over, she finally isolated it. It was the sound of a human voice. A woman's voice, whispering. The audio quality was abysmal, warped, and distorted by decades of decay. Barely audible above the roar of the static she had so carefully filtered out. But it was there. It was the voice of Isabela Neves, and she wasn't singing. She was keeping a diary. A secret, whispered diary, recorded over the top of her own piano rehearsals. A layer of thought and fear hidden beneath a layer of art. Sophia spent another week painstakingly restoring the fragmented whispers. What she pieced together was the heartbreaking final chapter of Isabela's life. It was a story not of a reclusive artist, but of a brilliant woman terrified of the world's greed.
He visited again today. He calls himself my mentor, but he has the eyes of a thief. He listens to the symphony, and he does not hear the music. He hears the applause. He hears the money.
The voice spoke of a man, a rival, a celebrated and charismatic young composer from the conservatory who had at first championed her, but whose encouragement had curdled into something predatory. His name was Artur Ribeiro, a name that made Sophie's blood run cold. Artur Ribeiro was not some forgotten musician. He was now Maestro Artur Ribeiro, one of the most famous and decorated classical composers in the world, a national treasure. Isabela's whispers painted a dark picture. She spoke of Artur's constant visits, his demands to see her finished score, his suggestions that her music was too complex for a woman to orchestrate on her own, that she needed a man like him to guide it into the world.
He told me this symphony was a monster, too brilliant. He said the world would not accept it from a woman, said it would die with me in this room. He offered to present it as his own, to protect it, to protect me. He was not offering to help. He was offering to erase me.
The final recovered whisper was from the night of the fire. The audio was more distorted, panicked. The sound of the piano frantic and discordant in the background, as if a terrible argument were taking place.
He is here. He says I am being selfish, that I am hoarding a masterpiece. He says if I will not give it to him, it should not exist at all. The candle. Oh God, the candle dot the pages. The whisper cuts off abruptly, replaced by a final. Horrifying sound, the sudden, violent roar of fire, which then dissolves into the endless hiss of static.
Sophia sat in the dead silence of her workshop, the headphones still on, her body cold with a terrible, profound understanding. She now held the truth. Actu Hiberu, the celebrated maestro, had been there that night. He hadn't stolen her music. He had tried to, and when she refused, his ambition and rage had led to the fire that killed her and destroyed her work. He hadn't set the fire, perhaps, but he had walked away from it, leaving her to die, burying his crime under the ashes of her genius. He had built his entire celebrated career on a foundation of silence and her forgotten bones. The ghost's true purpose was now terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a plea to be heard. It was a testimony. The tape wasn't just a recording of a symphony. It was the sole surviving witness to a 50-year-old crime. The haunting was not the act of a spirit seeking peace. It was the act of a victim, desperately trying to point a finger from beyond the grave at the man who had erased her. And Sophia, the humble audio restorer, was now the only person in the world who could hear her accusation. The ghost symphony was no longer a beautiful melody to Sophia. It was a war cry. The fragmented whispers from the tape had transformed her from a restorer into an avenger. She now possessed the 50-year-old testimony of a dead woman, a testimony that pointed directly at one of the most powerful and beloved cultural figures in the country, Maestro Hibiru. For days, she wrestled with the weight of this knowledge. What does one do with a ghost's accusation? Who do you take it to? The police. They would laugh her out of the station. The press. They would shred her reputation, painting her as a delusional fanatic seeking fame. But the ghost in her machine would not let her rest. The haunting intensified, but it also changed in nature. The beautiful, melodic fragments became rarer. Instead, the static would now be punctuated by a single, furiously repeated piano chord, a dissonant, angry cluster of notes, played over and over, like a cry for justice. And sometimes, in the dead of night, the restored speakers would emit a single, whispered word, a sound so faint, it was barely there, but a word that chilled Sophia to the bone. Ardor. Isabella's spirit was no longer content with being heard. It was now demanding to be understood. Driven by this spectral urgency, Sophia made a decision. She had to confront the man himself. She knew it was a dangerous, perhaps foolish, idea, but she felt she owed it to Isabela. She had to look into the eyes of the man who had built his empire on her ashes and see if there was any flicker of guilt, any shadow of the truth left within him. She secured a press pass to a public masterclass that Maestro Ribeiro was giving at the National Conservatory of Music, the very same institution where he and Isabela had once been students. Seeing him in person was a disorienting experience. Maestro Artur Ribeiro was the epitome of grace and success. He was charming, witty, and his every word was met with reverent applause. It seemed impossible that this celebrated icon could be the same predatory monster from Isabella's whispers. Sophia almost lost her nerve. But then, as he was demonstrating a passage of music, he played a chord progression that was shockingly, undeniably, similar to a fragment from Isabella's symphony. It was a fleeting echo, a musical ghost that had clearly lodged in his subconscious for 50 years. In that moment, Sophia saw not the maestro, but the young, ambitious rival. And her resolve hardened. During the question and answer session, she stood up. Her voice, when it came out, was shaking but clear. She didn't accuse him. She was more clever than that. "Maestro," she began, her question cutting through the fawning praise of the other journalists. "I am an audio historian researching the lost composers of the 1960s. I recently came across a reference to a brilliant, reclusive contemporary of yours from the conservatory, a composer named Isabela Neves. I was wondering if you had any memories of her, or of the groundbreaking work she was doing before her tragic death." For a single, electric moment, the maestro's composure shattered. It was a micro-expression, a flash of recognition and panic, so fast that almost no one else in the room would have noticed it. But Sophia saw it, and it was all the confirmation she needed. He remembered. He knew exactly who she was talking about. He quickly replaced the look with one of practiced, melancholic nostalgia. "Ah, Isabella," he said, his voice a soft, sad baritone that captivated the room. "A name I have not heard in many, many years. A terrible tragedy. She was a talent, yes, a raw, undisciplined talent, very fragile, very troubled. She was working on something, a grand symphony, I believe, but it was chaotic, dissonant, the work of a mind on the edge. I tried to help her, to guide her, but she refused all assistance. In the end, I believe her genius, such as it was, consumed her. Her death in that fire, while tragic, was perhaps an inevitability. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, delivered with the skill of a master performer. He had painted Isabella not as a genius, but as a mentally unstable woman, and himself as her compassionate, concerned mentor. He had taken her truth and twisted it into a neat, tragic narrative that reinforced his own heroic image. He had, in just a few sentences, erased her all over again. Sophia left the masterclass, her heart a block of ice in her chest. She had failed. She had looked the monster in the eye, and the monster had simply smiled back, its power absolute and unshakable. The ghost's testimony was no match for the maestro's. Living legend. As she walked, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered, and a cold, professional voice spoke on the other end. "Ms. Sophia," the voice said, "this is a courtesy call from the legal representatives of Maestro Ribeiro." He was concerned by your line of questioning. "We are here to advise you that any further inquiries into the life of the late Ms. Neves, or any attempt to publish unsubstantiated claims regarding her relationship with our client, will be met with the most aggressive legal response imaginable. We have vast resources. You have a small workshop. I trust you understand. Have a pleasant day." The line went dead. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of victory. The maestro had not only dismissed her, he had preemptively silenced her, burying her investigation under the threat of financial and legal ruin. Sophia returned to her workshop that night completely and utterly defeated. She had the ghost's voice, she had the symphony, she had the truth, but the world did not want it. The world was happy with its beautiful lie. She sat in the dark, the reel-to-reel machine silent on her desk, and she felt Isabella's 50-year-old despair as if it were her own. The ghost had been silenced. The monster had won, and she had no idea what to do next. Chapter 4. The Symphony's Last Request. Asterisk. There is a silence that is far heavier than the absence of sound. It is the silence of Akidame, a quiet born from the death of hope. For 3 days and 3 nights, Sophia's workshop was entombed in this kind of silence. The maestro's legal threat had been a perfect, killing blow. It had not just intimidated her. It had shown her the fundamental, unchangeable physics of the world. A whisper of truth, no matter how pure, cannot survive against a hurricane of power and influence. She had failed. The ghost's 50-year-old cry for justice had ended not with a bang, but with a lawyer's cold, polite dismissal over the phone. The haunting stopped. The real Turiel machine, which had been the conduit for a lost soul, was now just a machine. She would turn it on, and all she would hear was the empty, lifeless hiss of static. No beautiful melodies, no angry, dissonant chords, no whispered name, just nothing. It was the most terrifying sound of all. It was the sound of Isabela's spirit finally giving up. It was the silence of a second death. Sophia felt this loss as a physical weight, a cold hollowness in her chest. She had not just lost a paranormal phenomenon to investigate. She had lost a presence, a collaborator, a soul she had come to feel a profound and personal duty to protect. On the third night of this suffocating silence, Sophia made a decision. She was going to give up. The world did not want Isabela's truth, and Isabela's spirit had fallen silent. She decided she would erase the files, burn the transcriptions, and try to forget the impossible music that had consumed her life for the past few months. It was an act of self-preservation. Before she did, however, she felt a need to perform one last, final ritual of farewell. She wanted to hear the symphony, the beautiful, tragic, impossible symphony, one last time in its entirety. She had created a rough compilation of all the fragments she had recorded, sequencing them in the order that felt musically correct. It was a broken, disjointed version of the masterpiece, full of gaps and abrupt transitions, but the soul of the work was there. As the first notes of the piano filled her ears, a profound sadness washed over her. She was listening to the most beautiful music she had ever heard, a work of art that the world would now never know. She was the sole member of the audience for a dead woman's magnum opus. She listened, lost in the soaring melodies and the fiery complex passages. She heard the genius, the solitude, the fear, and then, as the music moved into the fragmented, unfinished third movement, something began to happen. The sound in her headphones began to change. It wasn't the music itself. It was the static. The background hiss on the recording, the sound she had worked so hard to filter out, began to increase. In volume, it grew from a soft hiss to a loud roar, a wave of white noise that threatened to overwhelm the piano. She almost stopped the playback, thinking it was a software glitch. But then, she realized the static wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a cadence. It was pulsing in time with the most anxious, fearful passages of the music. And within that pulsing roar, she could hear it again, faint, distorted, but undeniably there. Isabela's whisper. It wasn't forming words this time. It was a sound of pure, raw emotion. A sound of desperate, unbearable frustration. And in that moment, Sophia understood, with a clarity that felt like a lightning strike to her very soul. She understood everything. She had been wrong, so profoundly, completely wrong. She had been so focused on the crime, on the story of the murder, on the villain, that she had completely misunderstood the ghost's true desire. Isabela's spirit wasn't screaming for justice against Arthur Ribeiro. It was screaming in agony because its creation, its symphony, was incomplete. The frustration, the dissonant shrieks when Sophia made a mistake, it was not the anger of a victim. It was the torment of an artist whose work was being heard in a broken, imperfect form. The haunting wasn't a cry for revenge. It was a desperate plea for the symphony to be finished. The final whispered message from the tape had not been an accusation. It had been an instruction. He said it would die with me in this room. That was the fear that had anchored her spirit to the tape. Not that her murderer would go free, but that her music would die with her. Her true legacy wasn't the story of her death. It was the symphony itself. Sophia ripped the headphones off, her mind racing, her heart pounding with a new, revitalized purpose. She looked at the wall of sheet music, at the silent reeltorial, at the legal threat from the maestros, lawyers, and she began to laugh. A wild, breathless laugh of pure, unadulterated revelation. She had been fighting the wrong battle. You couldn't fight a man like Arthur Ribeiro with the truth of the past. His power was in the present. But she could give Isabela what she truly wanted. She could give her an audience. She could give her an orchestra. The path forward was now brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. Restoring the degraded tape was impossible. Convincing a real orchestra to play a ghost's music was insane. But she didn't need them. She lived in a different century. She had the world's most advanced digital instruments right at her fingertips. She had Isabela's transcribed notes, and she had the ghost herself, trapped in the machine, as her guide. She would not just restore the symphony, she would complete it. She would become the hands of the ghost, the final collaborator in a 50-year-old masterpiece. She would use technology not to prove a crime, but to resurrect a piece of art. The maestro and his lawyers could guard the past, but she was about to give Isabela Neves a future. The quest for revenge was over. The act of creation was about to begin. Chapter 5. The Digital Resurrection. An exorcism, in its classic sense, is the act of casting a spirit out. But what Sophia embarked upon in the final weeks of her investigation was something far more profound. It was an act of integration, an invitation. She was not trying to banish the ghost of Isabela Neves. She was trying to collaborate with it, to provide the final, missing piece that would allow the spirit to complete its life's work and finally find peace. Her workshop became a strange and beautiful bridge across time, a place where a 21st century audio engineer and a 1960s composer worked together to finish a masterpiece. The process was an extraordinary synthesis of the supernatural and the technological. Sophia would load Isabela's transcribed melodies into her music software. Then, she would play the reel-to-reel machine. As the ghostly piano fragments emerged from the static, she would use them as a guide, orchestrating the symphony around them. She used the world's most advanced virtual instruments, the sound of a Stradivarius violin sampled in a Viennese concert hall, the percussive power of a Fazioli grand piano, to build a full, rich, digital orchestra around Isabela's phantom. Piano. The ghost, in turn, became her silent conductor. When Sophia's orchestration perfectly matched Isabela's original, unheard vision, the ghostly piano melody would surge in volume and clarity, a spectral nod of approval. But if Sophia chose the wrong instrument, a cello instead of a viola, or wrote a harmony that betrayed the spirit of the work, the beautiful music would instantly warp into that familiar, agonizing shriek of dissonant noise. It was a grueling, high-stakes process of trial and error, a duet where one partner was a living woman, and the other was a 50-year-old echo of artistic perfectionism. Slowly, painstakingly, over hundreds of hours, the symphony was born. It was a perfect fusion of two worlds. The finished work was breathtaking. It had Isabela's raw, untamed genius in its melodies and harmonies, and Sophia's modern technical polish in its production. She had filled in the gaps, completed the unfinished third movement based on the emotional trajectory of the rest of the work, and polished it into a single, cohesive, 25-minute-long piano concerto. It was a work of art that was simultaneously 50 years old and brand new. As she put the final touches on the master recording, a profound silence fell over the workshop. She played the reel-to-reel machine one last time, but now there was no music. There was no angry dissonance. There were no whispers. There was only the clean, empty, peaceful sound of pure, neutral static. The ghost was gone. Its work was finished. The symphony was complete, and its frantic, creative energy, the energy that had tethered Isabela's spirit to that tape, had finally been expended. The silence was no longer one of defeat. It was the silence of release. Sophia knew what she had to do next. She did not send the recording to the police or the press. She did not attach her own name to it. She was not the composer. She was merely the midwife. She created a simple, anonymous online profile on all the major music platforms. The artist's name was listed simply as Isabela Neves. The album was titled Sinfonia Silenciosa, the Silent Symphony, and in the album's description, she wrote only one line, a lost masterpiece from 1970, completed and released as its composer always intended. She released it into the world with no promotion, no explanation, no backstory. She just opened the cage door and let the music fly, and the world, in its infinite, chaotic wisdom, heard it. The Silent Symphony became a viral phenomenon of the most organic kind. It was a mystery and a masterpiece, all in one. Musicologists were baffled and mesmerized. Critics wrote rapturous reviews, comparing its genius to Shostakovich and Rachmaninoff. The story of the lost composer Isabela Neves became a legend, a romantic tragedy that only added to the power of her work. Her name, once erased by fire and buried by a powerful man's lie, was now being spoken with reverence in concert halls and conservatories around the globe. Maestro Arturo Hibe, now in the final years of his life, was asked about it in an interview. The footage is telling. He dismisses the work as a clever, modern forgery, but there is no fire in his eyes, only a deep, weary sense of defeat. He was a man being haunted in his final days, not by a ghost, but by the beautiful, inescapable sound of the masterpiece he had tried, and failed, to silence forever. Sophia never took credit for her work. She remained a silent collaborator, the secret custodian of the story. She had learned that true justice is not always about punishing the guilty. Sometimes, it's about resurrecting the beautiful. The ghost of Isabela Neves did not want her murderer's name to be remembered. She wanted her music to be immortal. And in the end, she got her wish. The exorcism was complete, not when the spirit was banished, but when its art was finally set free. This has been the story of the Silent Symphony, the tale of an audio restorer who discovered a reel-to-reel tape haunted by the ghost of a forgotten musical genius, Isabela Neves. By listening to the static, she uncovered not only a lost masterpiece, but a 50-year-old story of betrayal and a cry for justice. But when the powerful man responsible tried to silence her, she realized the ghost's true desire was not revenge, but for its art to live. Using modern technology, she collaborated with the spirit to complete the symphony and released it to the world, proving that the most powerful way to exorcise a ghost born of silence is not to fight its killer, but to give it an eternal voice. The world is filled with silent symphonies, voices that were erased, masterpieces that were buried. Here at Crimson Tales, we believe in listening to the static. If you believe that a beautiful truth is more powerful than a convenient lie, and that every lost story deserves a final performance, then join our investigation.
Subscribe to the channel and help us give a voice to the ghosts who refuse to be forgotten.